Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Cameras and Coffee. And today we have two cameras pending official announcements to talk about. The first one, it will not shock you to learn, is the Sony Alpha A7S III. There are conflicting and inconsistent rumors about it online, so we'll take a look at a few of those and talk a little bit about what some of them mean. And then the second one is the as of yet unnamed Pentax APS-C Flagship. So it looks like the way Pentax is structuring their cameras is they'll have a medium format, a full frame, and then multiple APS-C DSLRs for all of these. There'll be a flagship APS-C DSLR and then some sub-tiers. Whether or not they ever come out with multiple tiers of full frame, I don't know. I wouldn't expect them to, and I'm not sure that there's a market for it. Quite honestly, I don't think it's in Pentax's benefit to have multiple competing full frame DSLRs. Especially if, as we talked about earlier this week, they end up being the only purist DSLR maker, or the only company that is making DSLRs. If Nikon and Canon both go mirrorless, it will be Pentax in the DSLR market having it to themselves. So firstly, Alpha A7S III. There are some really interesting things. There's a link in the description to a Petapixel article about it. It's called Sony Confirms Alpha A7S III Launch on July 28th, which is today's the it's 4 days from now. Here's what we know so far. So Sony has already announced that it's coming out, and they will discuss it on the 28th. B&H and Amazon both list it for sale at a price of $1,800, body only. Neither of them have any specs listed on their website. So I just checked that this morning. I figured first thing, maybe they accidentally posted the specs. No. So Petapixel's referencing Sony Alpha rumors, and what they're saying, what Petapixel is saying sounds the most credible in a nutshell, is a redesigned 12 megapixel image sensor with fast readout. Yes! That small sensor on the A7S II is fantastic. I love it. It doesn't have the resolution of the K1. The K1 has an amazing sensor. These are my two full-frame cameras, which is why I'm comparing them. It's not a fair comparison. But the 12 megapixel sensor, just high ISO shooting doesn't look meaningfully different, whether it's video or still, than low ISO shooting. And also, the files are pretty easy to work with. I have to convert them to DNG because CS6 doesn't support the A7S II's RAW files. But at any rate, which I'm fortunate because I'm sure I could get even more out of them, but it has a wonderful sensor. So having an even better 12 megapixel sensor is a huge selling point for me. 16-bit RAW output standard, and that's good. Sony's claiming 15 stops of dynamic range in practical application for real-world shooters. You'll likely see this being somewhere in the vicinity of 12 to 14, more likely 12 to 13 stops. That's going to be limited by a number of factors. So I couldn't tell you with certainty how they test that, whether they're testing it based on sensor data output or whether they're actually taking out into the real world and measuring how much dynamic range they get out of the sensor with tweaking in post. So generally, the dynamic range claims from manufacturers tend to be a little bit more optimistic than real-world performance. Also, there are limiting factors in front of your camera. Lighting, of course, being one of them, whether you have even or high contrast lighting. And more stops of dynamic range is better for high contrast situations because it can record better highlight and better shadow detail. You can pull back the highlights with a 16-bit RAW file, bring out the shadows with a 16-bit RAW file, so you can recover more of those details in post. Also, different lenses perform differently. Now, lenses don't have a major effect on how much dynamic range you have, but they do have an effect on things like the color temperature of your image. Now, if you're wondering what I mean by that, the best thing you can do is go out and get 2 super cheap 28mm lenses for your camera. Different makes, different eras. And if M42 is pretty much universal, so if there's an M42 adapter for your camera that does not require correcting glass, M42 is a good way to do this. 50mm work the same way, you know, but the point of it is spend 20, 25 bucks on a couple of lenses that are the same focal length and maximum aperture. Try to get them from 10 to 15 years apart. And different makers. Maybe like one Pentax and one Vivitar or something like that. And what you do is you put them each on the front of your camera and shoot through them at the different apertures. And what you'll find, in all probability, is that one of the lenses will skew warm and the other one will skew cool, or one will be neutral and the other will be one of the other ways. More likely, one goes warm, one goes neutral. So I found that with shooting, when I take the A7S II and the K1 out, I'll take the Rokinon 14mm on the A7S II and the Irix 15mm on the K1. Pretty much comparable specs. The Irix is super cool in terms of color temperature. It brings in light and it's just got a very blue tinge to it. The Rokinon is the opposite way. It skews warm. The images come in with a very distinct yellow-orange hue, especially in the highlights. And that's without doing anything in post. That's just the way that the images come out of the lenses. So different optical designs bend light in different ways. Different coatings, different glass types alter that light as it comes through. And so some of what is reaching your sensor is going to be different because of that glass. So what I'm saying is that there's a case to be made that the lens that you have, especially if it has poor light transmission, poor contrast transmission, will affect how well your sensor can pull that dynamic range out of an image. Okay. That said, if you're shooting a brand new camera and using brand new lenses, they're going to be way, way, way better and will be able to come close to this stated Sony spec. All right, on to the rest of the petapixel. 1080 with 240p, so it's 240 frames per second at high def. That's good. That is 8x slow motion. The 10-bit 422 4K 120p video and 4K 120p raw video over HDMI. Okay, so that's one bullet, but it's got two specs there. So 120p video is a very high frame rate video. It's 4 times playback speed. Gives you very, very smooth movement. So if you have more frames and you're panning, right, then what's going to happen is when it plays back, even at normal speed, you get a smoother movement across your pan. So you'll get less blurring in your frames as you have pan motion. So that's a very good thing there. Then raw video over HDMI means that it sounds like, reading between the lines, you're not going to get 120p raw video written to the memory card, only if you tether it over HDMI to a laptop or other computer. 600 megabytes per second bit rate, which I believe is the memory card transfer rate. Base ISO of 160 for S-Log3, but no dual ISO. No record time limits. That's a major, major thing for videographers. In another article I read, which I could not find this morning when I went to get the links, it also said that no record time limit is limited to the standard 4K recording, and that it also, the passive cooling system in the camera allows that. If you're going to be shooting something, I think it said if you shoot 120p or if you're shooting slow motion with it, then there will be a recording time limit because the passive cooling can't keep up. Still speculation, I believe. We'll find out when Sony makes the announcement in 4 days for sure. Fully articulating screen and UHS-2 SD card slots. So the fully articulating screen is nice. My number one complaint about the Alpha 7S II is that if this is the back of the camera and you're looking at it from the side, the screen does this, or it does this. It does not do this, which means that because it cannot fold out portrait orientation, shooting the camera portrait orientation can be a real pain in the sunlight, or if I want it beneath me. When I use the Pentax K1 as a comparison, because I compare these two cameras a lot because they go out on hikes with me together a lot. So the K1, the screen pops out from the back and can articulate in any direction because it has four struts with a ball and socket joint on each end that allow it to move around. And that's really, really nice. And it allows it to be shot in portrait orientation as well as landscape orientation very easily. It's the most well-designed articulating screen on the market, period, end of story. Honestly, Sony should license that patent from Ricoh and put it on their A7S and A7R cameras, or A7 and A7 or A9 cameras. At any rate, fully articulating screen, huge step in the right direction. From the product photos of the A7S III, it's easy to see that it has the same type of screen as the ZV-1, which basically means that it has a hinge at the top that allows it to flip out like this. I have to imagine that it'll flip out in the same way that the A7S II screen does. But then there's also, if this is the screen here, a hinge on this side that allows it to flip out that way. So it looks like it should be able to flip around and be very posable, which will be very good for using it for portrait shooting in the studio or in the field. It will really expand the capabilities of the camera as a still camera. The UHS-2 SD card slots is an interesting one. It conflicts with, and this is, I only mention this because this is one of the most important specs in my mind for the Alpha 7S III. In an article that was released the same day, Tech Radar reports that the A7S III might support CFexpress cards. There are 3 CFexpress card specs, and they are not listed in this article. Where did I find them? Okay. I'll see if I can find the article and post a link in the description. There are 3 CFexpress specs. I believe that B, which is the middle spec, is the only one currently available. I know A and C are not. A is the smallest, C is the largest. I believe C is the same size as a standard CF card today, but I could be wrong not having held a CFexpress card. The primary difference in terms of function between the 3 of them, all 3 of them have the capacity for 1 gigabyte per second data transfers. The A has a single channel at 1 gigabyte. The B, which is slightly larger, has 2 channels, giving it a total of 2 gigabytes per second data transfer. And the C, which is the largest, has 3 channels for a total of 3 gigabytes per second of data transfer. The actual number is 1,000 megabytes per second, 2,000 and 3,000, which is slightly less than a gig, which is actually 1,084. At any rate, functionally 1, 2, and 3 gigs per second. Way faster than SD cards, even UHS-2 SD cards. So if the A7S III can support CFexpress Type A, especially if it can use them in a shared SD card slot with the SD card, so one slot, both types, that would be very useful because the CFexpress cards will be very good for videographers, the serious hardcore videographers who want to really push the camera to its max, whereas the SD UHS-2 cards will be good for people who want to shoot 4K like I do, or who want to do stills. The other real benefit of the CFexpress card is people who are shooting at high speed continuous to buffer underrun, because with a higher data transfer rate to the CF card, the buffer will underrun less quickly. So photojournalists, for example, who are just going to be shooting thousands and thousands of frames at a press conference or something like that, would really benefit from that. Sports photographers also would really benefit from that, because they'll be able to shoot at the higher frame rate without worrying about buffer underruns. So, and then there's also, I couldn't find the articles again for this morning, there were conflicting reports that the Alpha 7S III will both have the best electronic viewfinder, EVF, ever released on any mirrorless camera, and that the A7S III sacrifices EVF quality for other specs. I guess we'll see when it comes out on that one. Both of those rumors apparently came from very credible sources on, I think it was Sony Alpha rumors. So anyway, I think we've beat the Sony Alpha S3 horse enough. And I think lots of people are talking about it. We'll find out in 4 days what it's going to be like. I'm really excited, and it is a camera that I plan to buy next year in all probability to continue advancing the videography on this channel. The next one, this is a very interesting camera. Pentax, this article is also a petapixel and is titled Pentax shares more detail about its upcoming APS-C Flagship DSLR. It contains a link to a YouTube video where, with English subtitles for those who need it, where a Ricoh representative is talking about the improvements in the new APS-C Flagship. And there are some interesting ones. The bullet list does a nice job summarizing them. It's got a new optical viewfinder, which was a redesigned pentaprism made of high refraction glass. The glass type has never been used in a camera before. This prism has never been used in a camera before. The prism has an enlarging effect, and it's very bright. The interviewer in this video uses it and describes it. So it's 10% brighter than the prism in the Pentax KP, which I believe is as bright as the prism in the K1. And that's the brightest viewfinder prism I've ever used. So this is 10% brighter than that. It also enlarges, so it has a magnification of 1.05x. Not a huge enlargement, but it does mean that the image coming to your eye is slightly larger than what's going to reach the sensor, which means that glasses wearers, or actually anybody who likes an optical viewfinder, will really benefit from the quality of that viewfinder. Pentax started designing that pentaprism in 2017, so they've been 3 years of R&D on that one component of the camera, and began speccing it out even before that, so that they'd know what materials they wanted to use when they actually sat down to design it and make it. That to me shows an incredible level of commitment to camera quality to spend 3 years on the pentaprism. It blows my mind. I think it's just fantastic. And realistically, that level of dedication shows what it is Ricoh has really brought to Pentax, which is increasing the commitment to quality, increasing the commitment to making a camera which is really enjoyable for photographers to use. In one point of the video, the interviewer is holding it, and this guy he says so, and he is correct, he has big hands. But it's pretty clear he is having no problem using it. And also with the way that it's laid out, somebody with much smaller hands could hold it and use it very comfortably. It's a very attractive camera, and the layout on it is fantastic. The body design and grip are altered, so it's also smaller. If you looked at two Pentax DSLRs side by side, this one and an older one, it would be much thinner. The Ricoh representative talks about in the video making great efforts to make it as thin as possible so it would be lighter and easier to carry. And again, because it is a smaller camera, it's absolutely ideal to have as a high-end camera for hiking and carrying around without it being too big. Has an optimized control system with an AF selection joystick and larger buttons than the KP. The buttons are noticeably larger on this camera, which means it'll be very easy to find and push them. I've never been a fan of joysticks on cameras, it just feels like something that should break. But then, you know what? I said the exact same thing about the Nintendo 64 when it came out, and I've never broken one of those joysticks. So, I got to imagine that now, 25 years later, the joystick technology is so much better that this is going to be just fine. The joystick itself is not, it doesn't stick out and have a knob like a video game controller joystick. It looks basically more like a, if you've ever used a laptop with a mouse thumb pad or finger pad, that little eraser shaped thing, looks a little bit like that, so that you're basically just going to put your thumb on it and move it around by pushing your thumb in different directions. Looks like it should be very easy to use and very easy to control. On my gimbal, there's a control pad button, a little bit larger than that, but has a similar interface that I can use to control pans, ups and downs, diagonals, and things like that. Very easy to use. This looks similar but smaller. Has a newly developed smooth action shutter unit with a very light and smooth action. And again, this is something Pentax has really put a lot of effort into. Ricoh now has put a lot of effort into in their previous about 6 generations of camera. The K3 had a much better shutter than the K5, which is better than the K7. The K1's better than the K3. The KP is apparently very, very nice. I've never used it. But the shutters keep getting quieter. The motion from them is dampened far better than on previous generations, and that takes out a lot of the shutter shake when the shutter action occurs. The top panel has a very large LCD plate, which is nice. It's good to have a lot of information in the LCD plates. My one complaint about my Pentax cameras has always been the information in the LCD plate. It feels like it's an opportunity that's sometimes lost. So for instance, with the Pentaxes, you can simulate a low ISO by setting up the camera to just take multiple photos and then blend them in the camera. So if you set it up to take 10 or 50 or 2,000 photos, a really nice thing would be if there was a countdown on that LCD saying how many photos were left, because right now the only way to do it is to hit the menu button, which can introduce camera shake and ruin your entire shoot if you're trying to figure out how many photos you have left. And that is very frustrating when that happens. When you have a self-timer, it'd be nice if the LCD counted down the self-timer so you could just look at the top of it and see how many seconds are left. Things like that. When a background process is going on, it would be nice if the top LCD was used to communicate a little bit of information about that. So it's not... The Ricoh always puts nice LCDs on their cameras' tops. It would be nice if they put additional information, if they used them a little bit more effectively sometimes with camera shooting. It also has a brand new sensor and image processor that promise to improve image quality across the ISO range, especially at high ISOs. And the minimum ISO is going to remain 100. So this was something that I was thinking about a lot with this camera, and Pentaxes in general, is that they go down to 100. I think that the K5 has extended ISO down to 80 and things like that, but not many. My A7S II goes down to 50, and that's nice, right? Because that added stop means that you can slow water down for waterfalls just a little bit. But it occurred to me that the Pentaxes can do something my Alpha 7 can't, or if my Alpha 7 can, if any of my Sony cameras can, I haven't figured out how to do it. I don't think any of the Nikon or Canon DSLRs I have sitting in the other room can do this either. And that is what I just talked about with slow ISO simulation. You set the camera up on a tripod, you tell it to take some number of photos, and then it does, and then it blends them into a single image in the camera. And that has the effect of simulating a slower ISO. So let's say that you want to shoot a waterfall and you want to have a 1 second exposure, but it's full sun And even at f16, you're looking at 1/100th of a second as your max, as your minimum shutter speed. Yes. Okay. In that situation, you set the tripod up with the camera on it, you compose your image, and then you set the camera to take something like 50 photos. 100 would be overkill, but you could do that. And because if you have 1/100th of a second shutter speed and you want to simulate a 1-second exposure, I guess 100 frames would actually do that well. And then just set the exposure time up for minimum, have it go, it takes all the frames, blends them into one, and you have very soft flowing water. Same thing with cloud trails. If you're out taking photos of the lake and you've got clouds moving in or something like that, then what you can do is, depending on how quickly the clouds are moving. In the mountains, they move very quickly. At sea level, they move very slowly. You set up the Pentax, have it take images at a regular interval, blend them all in cameras, and now in the camera, and now you have a cloud trail. It's a whole lot faster than taking. When I do this with my A7S, I have to come back, download them all to my computer, do it all in CS6, adds about 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes of time for each image that I want to do that. So the Pentax is just better for that. Realistically, if you're looking for a rugged, this is Ricoh's market. They want people who are shooting outside, who need a rugged camera with exceptional capabilities, and that's who they're targeting. It is who they have always targeted, and they have made cameras very good for that market. So landscape photographers, if you are interested, it's definitely worth trying out some of those features and at least renting a Pentax camera to try it out. So it looks like, once again, Ricoh is going to release an exceptionally well made, exceptionally well engineered, and exceedingly well thought out camera for Pentax fans. Not sure there's room for it in my lineup, unfortunately, but I do hope I get a chance to try it, because it's one I really do want to shoot with. So at any rate, that's really what we had to talk about for today. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you again next week for more Cameras and Coffee.